Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our first grantee webinar to discuss donor advised funds. My name is Ashley Heasel. I work at the foundation as the Director of Operations. I am a white woman with freckles, glasses, and medium-length blonde hair. I'm wearing a white shirt and a gray cardigan, and I'm sitting in my home office, like I suspect many of you are. Behind me is a credenza and a set of French doors. So thank you all for being here. With that, I have the opportunity to welcome you. In the chat, please say hello, who you are, and where you're from. Hi, Kara. Hi, Deb. Lynette, Tara, Rana, Melissa, Allison. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. We are so glad that you chose to be with us here today, and we're really excited about your interest in learning more about donor advised funds here at the foundation. We know firsthand that the many different funding sources in our region and even here at the foundation can be quite bewildering at times. The goal of this webinar is to demystify donor advised funds here at the foundation and just give you a better glimpse of our funding sources. Next slide, please. So I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Captioning is being provided for today's event. If you would like to enable the caption feed, use the closed caption button of the desktop app or in the settings sections of your mobile device. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be shared on the Foundation's YouTube channel. Questions will be accepted throughout the presentation and addressed at the end of the presentation and/or in follow-up materials if required. We do ask that you remain muted throughout the presentation, and you may leave your camera off if that is your preference. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please message Katie Balonis directly in the chat. Once again, that name is Katie Balonis. Next slide, please. Today's presenters in order of appearance include Amy Razum, our Senior Development Officer. She's going to talk about the different fund types at the Pittsburgh Foundation, as well as some other institutions. Mahogany Thaxton, our Senior Donor Services Officer and Plan Gift Specialist, is going to discuss the ins and outs of stewarding donors through donor advised funds. And Lisa Dorman, our Grants Coordinator, is going to walk through the Foundation's recent transition to electronic payments and communications. And finally, I will wrap us up with some legal items that pertain to donor advised funds and lead us into the Q&A. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Amy.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And again, it's wonderful to be with you all, even though I do wish, I'm sure just like all of you, that we could be together. But I am Amy Razum. I have been at the Foundation for about 4 years. And I am also working from home. I have a gold shirt on with my calm candle behind me, lighting our way, along with my Himalayan salt lamp. So I'm really just trying to encompass all of the good vibes in the community that we're sharing here today. So a good way for us to kick things off and to really set the stage and lay a foundation for the rest of our conversation is to go over a little bit of background about the Pittsburgh Foundation and just a really brief Community Foundation 101. So next slide, Katie. So the Pittsburgh Foundation has been around for 76 years. And in that time, we have grown to become the 14th largest community foundation around the country. We have around 750 sister organizations and community foundations, many of which are right here in Pennsylvania. So we do have a great resource and network to be able to work with our peers. We currently manage around 2,500 component funds. Now, what I mean by component funds is we have a whole menu of different fund types that folks can decide on when they come to us for their philanthropic and charitable giving options. They range from scholarship funds to designated funds and donor advised funds. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Currently, our assets are around 1.5 billion. And the one thing that really to keep in mind as we are talking today is that any of those component funds that folks start at the Pittsburgh Foundation are permanent endowments. So they are invested to grow over the forever time horizon. And really, when people start funds at the Pittsburgh Foundation, they are starting a legacy. They're starting a charitable legacy for themselves, for their family, for their kids. And we really take that to heart. So you'll probably hear legacy a lot come up in our conversation. We also have the Community Foundation of Westmoreland County, which is our affiliate. And we have folks on the ground working in that community to learn and grow and really know what the needs are in Westmoreland County. We're very fortunate to have our colleagues out at CFWC. And finally, last year, we hit a record for our grant making. So last year, we hit almost $67 million in grant making into the community and across the country. Obviously, 2020 was a little bit of an anomaly, and hopefully we'll just stay in the past. But I don't need to tell all of you that 2020 was a very difficult year. And so we were very, very fortunate to be able to work in conjunction with other private foundations here in the city and donors and organizations just like you. And so with all of that, we were able to grant out almost 67 million into the community. Next slide, Katie. So when do people decide to maybe set up a component fund at the Pittsburgh Foundation? We really look at this in two buckets, and this is really the world that I work in. I work with folks that are looking to establish a charitable legacy either during their life, so setting up something like a donor advised fund during their lifetime, and being able to get their kids or their grandkids involved in that generational philanthropy is one way. The other way is afterlife. So I also work with folks who are thinking about leaving a charitable component in their estate plans. This process looks a little bit like I would work with a donor who says, you know, I don't really want to start anything at the Pittsburgh Foundation during my life, but when I'm no longer here, it's important to me to know that there is an institution that will be shepherding my funds and making sure that organizations I cared about during my lifetime will continue to receive donations long after I'm gone. And so what would happen is when that person passes, we would get that asset. Again, that asset is invested to grow over the forever time horizon, because no matter when we get funds into the Pittsburgh Foundation, they are immediately invested in creating an endowment. And so even afterlife, folks that choose to use us as their shepherd for their legacy giving after they're no longer here, I work with them during their life to come up with a plan and a roadmap for how they would want their funds to be executed after they're no longer here. And I think that that's really important to understand, because as organizations who may be getting funds, just knowing and understanding that there really are two worlds that we work in as far as grant making is concerned. Folks that are living and folks that have passed away. Next slide, please. So I don't know about you guys, but before I started the Pittsburgh Foundation, if you would have said, Amy, what's a donor advised fund? I would say, let me Google that, because I did not know. But I will say that the donor advised fund is by far our most popular giving vehicle product, and I'll tell you why. So donor advised funds offer incredible flexibility for our donors. Let me explain. So a donor decides to open a fund at the Pittsburgh Foundation. I would work with them to create an agreement. They would transfer assets over that would open the fund. Those assets would be invested to grow our donor advised funds start at $10,000. Once that fund is opened, all of the assets are transferred, that donor has the ability to make grant requests and recommendations whenever they'd like. So they could open the fund in December and choose to start recommending grants to bona fide 501c3 organizations in January. Or maybe they'd like to take a minute and really think about what kind of impact they would want to make. So they don't have to make a grant right away. They can really work with their donor services representative to come up with that philanthropic strategy. So flexibility, I think, is the number one thing that folks really like about a donor advised fund vehicle. The other thing that I think people really gravitate towards donor advised funds is because, with the changes in the tax code, many people were faced with, okay, do I stop giving annual gifts to organizations because I won't get that tax credit? Or do I maybe really just have to drill down and get, stop giving to some organizations? A donor advised fund actually makes sure that people can continue to give annually while also getting that tax benefit. So let me explain. So if someone makes a larger gift in any given year, say $25,000, then that amount is invested, and that person can then carry that tax benefit forward while also making grants to organizations along the way. So you could still give annually to organizations that need that annual gift and also realize the tax benefit. And so really, out of all of our fund types, this is definitely the most popular. And I hope that this really puts into context how a donor advised fund would work at the Pittsburgh Foundation, but also into context for our grant making. So next slide, please. So as we said, last year, our grant making almost hit $67 million. And when you're looking at this slide, I want you to look at that bright blue 52% slice of the pie. That is donor-directed grant making. And that is exactly what we just went over. And so I think what's really important to understand is that the Pittsburgh Foundation gives money in a few different ways. One is by donor-directed grant making. So this is, again, living folks that are saying, I want to make a grant recommendation to the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. And then we at the Pittsburgh Foundation, and my colleague Lisa will go over this in a little while, will make sure that that money goes out the door, gets to the institution, and that they are using it in the way that the donor had intended. The rest of the pie chart, as you can see, is foundation directed. Our scholarship funds make up almost 5% of our total distributions out into the community. And that foundation directed piece, that gray chunk, is maybe what you're more familiar with, which is the traditional a nonprofit would apply to our grant making cycle and then would be awarded a grant. But again, I hope that this kind of gives you a very high level overview of when we say grant making from the Pittsburgh Foundation, this is what it is comprised of. And I think that that is really important as you think about stewarding and thinking about how you can engage with these donors. And with that, I think that's a really good transition to my colleague, Mahogany Thaxton, who's going to talk more in depth about how we work with our donors and how we steward those donors who have a fund at the Pittsburgh Foundation. Thank you, and I'm going to just pass it over to Mahogany.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. My name is Mahogany Thaxton, and as Amy shared, I'm a donor services officer. I've been with the foundation for a little over 4 years, and I work with donors after they've worked with Amy and they have established a fund with us, or they've established a legacy, a planned gift. I am a Black woman with dark brown skin. I'm wearing purple and black glasses. I have medium long twists in my hair, pink lipstick, and I'm wearing my favorite pink, white, and green floral sleeveless shirt. I'm also sitting in my dining room at a table There is a bright window to my left, along with an aloe plant and a eucalyptus candle on my radiator cover. And I'm really happy to be with you here today. Now that we have some background, thanks to Amy, on what exactly Community Foundation is and what donor advised funds are, as well as the two sides of the houses, the program side, as well as the donor side that we're talking about today, I'm going to focus on how we can best work together to acknowledge and steward donor advised fund holders as grantees. Okay. So Katie, can you go to the next slide, please? So first, before we get started, I have some work for you. I'm curious, what does stewardship mean to your organization? Please respond in the chat. I am so thrilled that everyone is very into using the chat, so please don't be shy. I ask this because I realize that we throw these words around, but stewardship most certainly can look differently, right? In each of your organizations, what you do, how you do it, how you define it. So please let us know in the chat below, and feel free to continue to add to it as you go on. And I see some things that are coming through, demonstrating the impact of a gift to the donor, building a strong and positive relationship, follow-up calls, impact reports, guidance and oversight. This is great. Regular emails and updates. Awesome. Thank you for your responses. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. I've actually seen stewardship pertain to the first two that I saw come through, specifically to a gift and to the overall relationship with the donor. When we think of stewardship related to how you interact with donor advised funds, it can be either and really anything in between. Katie, can you get to the next slide, please? And what it looks like really does depend on your organization, right? Your capacity, we all know what that is, or what the struggle that is, I should say, and of course the donor. So what we really want to think about is stewardship as a way towards partnership. And that can be engaged, that can be passive, both are good and really depend on the factors that I just mentioned. So with that in mind, we're going to touch on a couple of things in the next few slides, including acknowledging donor advised funds, thank you letters, follow-up reports, which I've seen a couple of people include in here, and our shift to trust-based philanthropy. Katie, next slide, please. So I want to start with something that may be a little confusing when working with staffs or donor advised funds. The question of, do we share donor information? The short answer is no, we do not. Many donors come to TPF because they want to be anonymous and they like having an intermediary that provides guidance without, frankly, solicitations that may not be a fit for them. So instead of sharers of donor information, please consider our team, Development and Donor Services in particular, as matchmakers. This is why you may still hear from us sometimes, right? You've probably reached out and been like, hey, we have a donor, or hey, we have this, or hey, we have that. And meanwhile, we've told you, no, we don't take solicitations, we don't share donor information. There's a fine line between solicitation and matchmaking, but we think that we walk it well. We just want to explain it a little bit more. It really is all dependent on the donors. So when we reach out to you, when you hear from us, it may be to ask for basic information so that we can take back to a donor who's requested it, or we may be introducing you directly to donors. However, as I said, this really is only shared at the donor's request. Otherwise, we're only going to share the fund name with you. So please just keep in mind that we don't solicit donors, we matchmake. With that in mind, I really encourage you to consider how you do prospect research, because you can do a little bit of your own matchmaking yourself. And when I say prospect research, just like stewardship, that can mean a lot of different things and depend on your capacity. But I really mean just some basic Googling or asking some curious questions of donors, making note of that information and connecting it to your programs, all is a way to do some of your own matchmaking. It can really help to uncover ways to build partnerships with the donors that you do know and potentially identify those who you don't know yet. This ensures that they are also soft credited appropriately. So you know in your system, who are these grants coming from this fund? Now, I will say sometimes it's really easy, right, to tell who the donor is behind the fund and the grant. Their name might be in it, right? It's the Bob Jones Fund of the Pittsburgh Foundation. Or they may have listed at the recommendation of and include the donor name on the grant. Or they may just have told you, right? Like, hey, we're sending out this grant, look out for it. And this is my ode to Jessica Fletcher here, you may have done some polite sleuthing on your own, right? Because I feel that all of us in this profession are really good at that. And you may have just figured out that, hey, this fund comes from this person. However that happens, if you have the capacity, I encourage you to connect that in your system, right? So connect those DAFs to the individuals behind them. And do this by soft crediting the donors and hard crediting the Pittsburgh Foundation. Because the Pittsburgh Foundation, in the eyes of the IRS, is the donor. And so that is the distinction between the two. You want to have them both in order to appropriately steward your donors. That also can help you to even identify, wow, sometimes they give to us through a DAF, sometimes they give to us a check. But if you don't know and have those things together, then you may be missing the full amount or the larger picture of your relationship with that donor. Katie, can you go to the next slide, please? And with that, I have a short poll question because I'm talking about soft crediting and hard crediting and all that jazz. But do you even know what that means? Are you soft crediting your donors? So I'm going to have a quick question. Just, are you soft crediting your donors? Yes, no, sometimes. What's a soft credit? You could do that for, I don't know, and that's okay too. And everybody is coming through. To give it a little bit more time. We're at 52% participation. Thank you. Everyone is letting us know. This is so helpful because you know what, so far we're seeing it's about 20% don't know, right? And so we are going to continue this conversation. A part of the conversation today is to help to uncover some of these things about what you need from us or how we might better be able to support or how we might demystify some of these terms that we're using that we're saying to you, are you doing this or are you not? We have about 73% participation, so I'm going to give another 10 seconds, so real quick, if you want to, please respond, but it's okay if you don't. And I'm going to close it. Thank you, everybody. And I hope the results are sharing, if you can see. So about half of you are soft crediting your donors. About a quarter of you don't know. A lot of it is sometimes, and just a small amount are no. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to stop sharing. And Katie, can you go to the next slide? Thank you for all of your responses. So beyond your internal systems, like soft crediting and hard crediting, I do want to talk about the best way to acknowledge donor advised grants in your publications, because we find that we get a lot of questions about this too. So the key thing to remember is that you really always should acknowledge the full fund name in the publication. So for example, the Do Good Fund of the Pittsburgh Foundation. I know it's a mouthful, but it is something that is the full fund name. So if the donor also requests that you include their name separately, you can absolutely do so. Please do so. I'm glad that you have a relationship with the donor to know that that's what they want. However, please still include the full fund name. You don't ever want to leave that out. For thank you letters, you may notice that some of your grant notification letters from us that either at this point are coming to you via email, and then we're electronically depositing your cash or your grant, or in a check, which you should still be getting an email grant notification letter. It may include the sentence or something like, we encourage you to send an acknowledgement of this letter directly to the Pittsburgh Foundation, which will then be forwarded to the donor thanking them for their generosity. And others may not include this, and they may include the donor's address. which, as a reminder, you should be connecting via soft credits. The reason is many donors really do want to be anonymous, and that's why some thank you letters come to the Pittsburgh Foundation, which, and we're demystifying stuff here, in full transparency, can take a couple of months to get to the donor. We have encouraged donors to share their addresses if they want the letters in a timely manner and aren't concerned about it being anonymous. We will continue to do this, but we, just like you are really just don't have the capacity to manage the letters that we receive. So please just follow the directions. Keep your thank you letters and impact reports meaningful. And remember that no one wants mass mailings, right? I say this because we do end up getting a lot. And I think about all the time and the effort and the money that you've put into that, and they're not looked at. When you address a letter, you can address it to Lisa Schroeder, our president, because again, we are the donors, but please also include the fund name. If you don't include the fund name, it is a lot of work on us on the back end to be able to figure out which grant it goes to. And also we want to make sure that you know in your own records, who is it that, what was the fund that made the grant to you? We've thought a lot about this. And we know sometimes that these are the only ways that you can connect with the donors behind the funds. And we do want to be transparent. That's why we're having these conversations. That we know the capacity can be an issue for everybody. And we really want to make sure that when you're sending out mass mailings or you're sending letters, that it is getting to the intended recipient in a way that demonstrates the partnership and the way that their gift may have facilitated, or their relationship with you may be facilitating the impactful work that you're doing. So one meaningful thank you letter or an update will be much more impactful than 15 newsletters to the development department, and it'll save you some time and money. Okay. Katie, can you get to the next slide, please? So I've said a lot, right? I'm just like, hey, we have capacity. We have 7,000 grants that are coming through. You're sending us these thank you letters. We're not always getting to the donors on time. How can we do this better, right? So as much as the thank you process is going to still stay the same, and we do forward the letters, believe me, but we do want to figure out a better way to do this. And we'll be discussing that with our donors, and we want to discuss it with you. So please let us know in the chat, and we're saving all of this. What are better ways that we can connect you to donors, right? What is, think big, dream big. This is a good space. We want to hear from you. We've all worked in nonprofits. This is not like we're these, donor services officers that are mysterious over here. We want to make these connections. Okay? So I'm going to move on for time's sake, but please continue to think about it. Add anything in. I like your ideas. I see someone saying scanning things, right? We're trying to figure out what are better ways that we can communicate these things. Donors' addresses, confirming them maybe on an updated basis, right? Because they do change. So how are we getting that information to you? And are you updating it in your system too? So Katie, could you move on to the next slide? Thank you. So all of these things that I've shared, they are meant to change how we operate, right? With all of you, with our donors, and with our donors with you, all in the goal of building trust. One of the key changes that you may notice related to thank you letters is that our foundation recently changed its policy on follow-up reports. So in the spirit of trust-based grant making, we are no longer requiring follow-up reports for most donor-directed grants made after June 1st of this year. If you still want to send one, by all means, please send it. I love reading update reports because we do read them before we pass them on to the donor. However, I will say in the past, we found that people provided minimal information on the follow-up reports, but they were submitting them to check off the box, right? Because we told you had to submit a follow-up report, but it really wasn't a good use of your time, right? And it didn't actually demonstrate how the donor was helpful, was a helpful partner in your mission. So if you do want to send a follow-up report, please make sure to include information that demonstrates impact, how the funds were used, and in a way that truly shows how the donor's financial support partnered with your expertise and the work of your teams, and how that resulted in, whatever impact your organization is having in our community. Please also include in there if there are other opportunities that you want to invite to engage donors, because we can pass that on to them. Again, donors may not want it, right? But it is, I think, a way to include something beyond a form letter that actually will be able to help you to say, hey, this is what we're doing. Please feel free to check us out. Okay. Katie, can you go to the next slide, please? And along with follow-up reports for donor advised funds, you may have noticed our program team. That's the foundation-directed grant making. And today we're talking about the donor-directed grant making. But on the foundation-directed grant making, our program team no longer requires a letter of inquiry. Both of these changes, the follow-up form on the donor side and the letter of inquiry on the program side, are a result of our foundation exploring trust-based philanthropy. Trust-based philanthropy is a national peer-to-peer funder initiative to address the inherent power imbalances among foundations and nonprofits through power redistribution. And there's a link there, and you can feel free to Google it too. This project encourages funders to do this through multi-year unrestricted funding, streamlined applications and reporting, and a commitment to building relationships based on transparency, dialogue, and mutual learning, which sounds amazing, right? I mean, I was very excited whenever I read this. But this is on the foundation directed side. And so our team is exploring how do we operate a similar model with donors, and welcome your feedback on what trusting partnerships between your organizations and donors could look like. So once again, I'm asking you to do all this typey, but please add in the chat. We'll save all of the feedback provided in the chat and use it to inform future conversations internally and with you and with our donors. And if you would like to share something that we didn't cover today, I know if we kind of run through it, please feel free to reach out. My contact information, all of our contact information is on the website. I'm the only Mahogany here, so I'm easy to find. And I've had the pleasure today to talk about all the ways that we can move forward. So I'd love to hear from you on whatever ideas that you may have. All of this is in better service to your organizations and the communities that you serve. So one way that we hope to do that is also by streamlining the payment process through electronic payments. And with that, I will pass the mic to my coworker, Lisa Dorman, who will talk more about that process. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mahogany. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Dorman, and I am the grants coordinator here at the Pittsburgh Foundation. I've been at the foundation for about 5.5 years, previously working on the donor services team for about 4.5 years, and now working on the grants management side of things since last fall. I am a white woman who has shoulder-length brown hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt. Behind me is a gray and white wall. Some of you might know my name from the grant payment letter emails that you receive. So it's great to be here all together, albeit virtually. Next slide, Katie. So as of March of 2020, the Pittsburgh Foundation has been offering payment to grantees via direct deposit, in addition to check payments. We're finding that grants made by ACH or direct deposit to grantees arrive faster and more smoothly. We don't need to depend on USPS delays or lost checks or anything like that, especially while you might still have staff members who are continuing to work from home or in a hybrid model. As you can see, all of us are in our homes today, so we're continuing to work remotely and going into the office on an as needed basis. So I imagine some of you might be going through the same. At this time, we are still offering grant payments via direct deposit and also via check. So if you are receiving paper checks, but you'd like to switch to ACH payments, that's absolutely still possible. You can enroll in direct deposit by submitting your banking information using our secure web form, which I have up on this slide in blue. And I'm also going to ask Katie to drop the link into the chat here for just ease of use as well. Oh, and speaking of the chat, I did see Renee, you had a question in there about donor-directed grants and whether or not that includes designated funds. It does. It does include designated funds. Next slide, Katie. So as we've navigated these past challenging 18 months of change and uncertainty, we've learned a lot from our nonprofit partners and from our own successes and challenges. So we wanted to just take a little bit of time today to share some of those with you in case they might serve you as well, kind of learning all from each other. Next slide, Katie. This is our tip number 1, is to create email filters. At this time, as Mahogany mentioned, we are still sending all grant payment letters and notifications via email when we have them. Many of you have reached out in the past to update contact information, email addresses, mailing addresses, contact names, staff turnover. So thank you for taking the time to do so proactively and make the process run a little bit smoother on both of our ends. When we don't have an email address on file, we will send the grant payment letter via USPS mail. So don't worry, you'll still get it. It might just be a little bit delayed. If you ever want to reach out to us and provide an email address after you receive a printed paper notification letter, we can always go into the system and make that update. So some of our grantees have told us that adjusting their email settings to auto-file the grant payment letters from us has been a helpful way when trying to, a few days later, match up the payment letter with the payment that you're looking at, whether it be a check or EFT. So while your email volume might feel manageable right now, as we know, believe it or not, year end is quickly approaching, and I think you can all remember the way that our email inboxes look as the year end approaches. So something like this might be especially helpful to you as email volumes rise. So the screenshot on this slide is from my Outlook inbox. So in Outlook, one way that you can set up an email filter is to right-click on a message in your inbox, and then you navigate down to Rules, and then over to Create Rule. And that will allow you to go ahead and set up an email filter from there. Next slide, please. So again, we've seen a lot of best practice in action from our grantees, and we're learning from you always and continuing to share that with everyone today. So our second tip is to create a group email address and then to share that with us. So as a note, we are happy to copy an additional 1 or 2 staff members on your organization's notification letters. If you're the director of development and you also would like your CFO to be receiving the notification letters so that they can match up EFT grants, that makes perfect sense. Just let us know and we can add them into our system. An even better way to ensure that the appropriate folks at your organization are receiving these letters is to create a group email account. So for example, at the Pittsburgh Foundation within the past year, we have created an email account of gift@pghfdn.org. And this is something that we give out to any of our banks or financial advisor partners so that we have control over who's informed at our organization when a gift is made to our organization. So this email account distributes to multiple members of our finance, develop, and executive team. And we're able to update the distribution list to this email account on the back end. So we don't need to reach out to our bank every single time we have somebody out on maternity leave or paternity leave, family leave, staff turnover. Maybe we've added a new position, so someone else needs to be getting updated. It's just been a lot less cumbersome on our end to remember who all to contact about it. We just make the updates on our end, and we can do that, as many times as often as we need to. So that's something that it would be an option for you. Slide, Katie. So as some of you might recall, we conducted a grantee survey in March of this year. We were super grateful to all of our grantees who helped us improve our processes by completing the survey and giving really valuable feedback. One concern that we had heard a few times was that it can sometimes be difficult to obtain the pertinent grant information when an EFT payment hits your bank account. So one thing that we learned and we wanted to share is that you can call your bank and request that they turn on the full info view for your bank statements, so that when you receive your electronic grant payments from us or from any other entity, you can see the full information that was provided by the initiating party. We do include the grant number in the full details to help match up the grant paperwork with the grant payment. So I have two images on this slide. The top image is the typical bank default, which shows limited details. And this is what ours looked like before we turned on our full details. So you'll see that the bottom image has the grant number and a note that an email has been sent to your organization to prompt you to look for that document in the additional details. We've received some questions about why we don't include more information on the statement line. The short answer is that there is a character limit that we have to abide by. But the longer answer is that there's so many pieces of pertinent donor information that might be included in that grant payment letter that's really important for you to locate it. So it might have the donor's name, their mailing address for acknowledgements, as Mahogany was talking about. Could have a grant purpose outlining their donor intent, follow-up report requirements, if the donor has requested that, or if it's a foundation directed grant. Grant conditions such as legal language or legal requirements, goods and services language. So just going back to what Mahogany was talking about earlier, your grant payment letter might have information in it that's helpful for you to continue to steward that donor relationship as well. So again, it just all depends on how much information the donor has opted to share, but there could be good nuggets of information there for you. Next slide, Katie. So our last tip is just to reach out to your friendly grants team. If you should need anything at all, please reach out to us. If you should need to update the email address where grant payment correspondence has been sent, communicate changes in staffing, anything like that, please feel free to reach out to Dot and I. Many of you, I'm sure, know Dot Sikora's name from her long tenure here at the Pittsburgh Foundation, so you can always reach out to her or myself. I have our shared email address on here, and then also our individual email addresses at the foundation. So now I'm going to hand things off to Ashley Hiesel, our Director of Operations, who is going to talk about some legal items to remember.
All right. Hi again, everyone. Okay, so donor advised funds come with a few legal restrictions. The reason for this is that when a donor establishes a donor advised fund, they give up control of that money. And assets once gifted to the foundation belong to the foundation. So as with any charitable gift, donors no longer own the gifted assets or retain any control over them. However, donors of donor advised funds do have advisory privileges to grant assets in their donor advised fund, but the foundation has the final authority to say yay or nay to the donor's recommendations. Next slide. Oh, we may need to advance 2 slides, actually. Yeah. Could you take it to the next one as well, Katie? Okay, so let's talk about tax receipts. Because donors received a charitable tax deduction when they established or added to their fund at the Pittsburgh Foundation, your organization is off the hook. You're not responsible for sending a receipt to the donor. From the point that the gift is made to the foundation from the donor, the assets are deemed to be charitable dollars and legally belong to the foundation, which is a charitable entity. So we do not need the tax receipts, nor does the donor. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this same reason, the IRS does not allow donors to receive material benefits, such as free admission to grantee events, a discount at its retail shops, or a table at a benefit fundraiser for the organization. Donors may not receive personal benefit, and that includes goods and services for their donations. Legislative history states that a benefit is more than incidental if the fact that the donor receives it would have reduced or eliminated a charitable contribution deduction. This prohibition also covers family members. So for example, the donor advisor's spouse, ancestors, children, grandchildren, you get it, anyone in their family. So I want to talk through 2 examples of this. Donors cannot recommend a grant to an organization's gala event and then receive tickets to attend. This is probably one of the most common ones that we see. Those tickets are then a benefit and therefore are against the rules. This is still true when the costs are bifurcated or when the donor splits a payment to a fundraising event, paying the non-charitable portion individually and the deductible part out of a donor advised fund. The second item here is donors cannot recommend grants from donor advised funds for membership fees. Membership is a benefit to the donor, so therefore they cannot use the funds for membership fees. Let's see, next slide, please. Okay, so since I couldn't find clip art for charitable pledges, I had to improvise this one. In short, donors may not use donor advised funds to fulfill a legally binding pledge. Please keep this in mind when you're asking donors to sign pledge statements. And I do want to clarify that a moral pledge does not apply here. We're talking about legally binding pledges. And on our end, anytime a donor or advisor uses the term pledge, it sends up alarm bells for all the staff members, and we actually have to investigate. So it's not something that we like to see when donors use the word pledge. All right, next slide. All right, allowable benefits are those that would not reduce or eliminate a charitable contribution. Examples of this include when a donor motivated by gratitude advises a distribution to the local chapter of the American Red Cross for providing food or temporary shelter after the donor's own home was destroyed by a tornado. Another example would be when a donor recommends a contribution to the volunteer fire department that serves the area where the donor owns a home. So those are two sort of examples of allowable benefits. It's not a more than incidental benefit. I also want to talk about token gifts. So that's something like a keychain or a coffee mug. These items would not be considered a more than incidental benefit and are therefore allowable. Under the token exemption rules for contributions to charities, insubstantial goods or services received do not reduce the amount of the donor's charitable tax deduction. So goods or services are typically insubstantial if the payment occurs in the context of a fundraising campaign and if the fair market value of the benefit is low and lower still relative to the contribution. So like, for example, if you gave a $100 contribution and the trinket is, $3 or $4, that's a very low market value compared to the donation. So I think that is it for legal items, which means we are moving into Q&A. I just want to take a moment quickly to see what was in the chat. I know there was a question earlier on asking about there used to be an annual opportunity to update the donor services team on our organization's work through a form submitted through the foundation to assist you with matchmaking. Is that process still available? And if so, where does that reside in your website? Actually, Mahogany, Amy, which one of you want to take this? I'm not.
I was actually just responding.
Oh, great. Okay.
And Taryn included in the chat. Ashley's talking about the Center for Philanthropy intake form. And yes, it does still exist. It is a form where annually you may update us about things that are happening in your organization, whether it's leadership changes or programmatic changes, or just, making sure that we have an idea of what you're doing and that we can share with donors. That information is shared with our team, my team donor services, Amy's team development, and that is where the matchmaking comes in. And I hope this is helpful so you understand that there actually is no way to solicit the donor, meaning to send to us and say, hey, shop this around. Do you know what I mean? It's much more of a, when we are meeting with these donors and we're hearing what their interests are, knowing that what you are doing and knowing that information, we have basically these little Rolodexes in our heads and our notes that we then match make when that right opportunity comes up. So maybe someone who's very specifically looking for, not just supporting conservation, but supporting trails in the Steel Valley. I saw someone talk about the trailhead, and so all requests that come to us that are to support the environment or that to support, green spaces may not be a fit. right? Even though you're a great organization, and you might be a fit for someone who we talk to in 6 months. And so timing almost is just as important as the interest part of that. So yes, I would encourage you all to please submit an intake form once a year. That link is in the chat. I'm going to respond to Lori as soon as I stop talking, because I know she had a question about wanting to know DAF interests. And I think that's exactly in the same way. Like, there's no way for us to actually list. It would literally be thousands of nuanced little interests if we tried to list all the interests of DAFs. And it's really not going to be useful for you, because you might go through and be like, oh, well, that fund has an interest, but they might not grant to any new organizations, or they might not have any grant making this year. And so the better use of your time is really to submit that form. Let us know what you're doing. Let us know what those updates are. We work, our magic. And that's why you may randomly get a call from us 7 months after you told us about it, because that is when that right donor who is the right fit for you, may come into our orbit, or may be ready at that point to, be interested in hearing about organizations. So I hope that makes sense. Amy, please add. You're on mute.
You would think by now I have learned how to unmute myself. So I did drop in the chat where on our website you can find donor-directed grant making broken down by field of interest. So education, medical, arts and culture, all of that. So we do provide that. The numbers on their website are from 2019. I know our comms team is working very hard to do the breakdown from last year, which again will look probably a little bit different because of COVID. So lots of basic needs last year, and a lot for special initiatives like racial justice, social justice. So again, it varies by year, right? Yes, we do have some donors that they know every year exactly where they want to give to. It's probably not going to deviate too much. But then we also work with donors who want to give to wherever it is most necessary right now. And that happened quite a bit last year. And so it could be a really good guidepost, but again, I wouldn't take it as complete and total gospel as far as the interests and intent of our donors, because it's ever changing. And again, they can direct their giving wherever they want. Mahogany said, we are not soliciting them. We are helping them. We are working with you, working in partnership with you all to gather information and be able to give that to our donors, but we are not actively soliciting them. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, everyone. Let's see, next up. There was a question asking how then do we recommend that grantee orgs work with donors to make a donation with the intent of renewing their membership? And that's a tough one. I think those types of grants need to come from their personal funds and not their donor advised funds.
Correct. I second that, Ashley. Yeah, I would just recommend that donors, and I always preface my conversations with folks that are keen on going to events or golf outings or anything like that, that any donations made to organizations with the intent of receiving something like that you just make out of your own personal checking account or through a different vehicle that is not your donor advised fund.
There was one other question asking about the intake form, whether or not they're able to see when they last submitted their intake form. Does anyone know the answer to that?
That's a good question. I don't, but we're really nice. So you could just send us an email, right? Like seriously, like Taryn, she's great. You probably heard from her. Actually, if you registered for this, you got an email from her. But yeah, just send us an email.
Actually, you should be able to see in your request history when you log into Foundit. On your dashboard, you can go to request history, and under that tab, you should see if you have submitted an intake form. We ask that nonprofits submit one intake form per year, and that's just due to volume. There are a lot of nonprofits in the region. We want to make sure we have an opportunity to get to everyone. But you should be able to see when you last submitted in there and then resubmit. And if you have any difficulties, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help, and I'll drop my info in the chat.
Thanks, Taryn. All right, let's see. Oh, I see. What if they've already made the donation and they tell us it was meant to renew their membership? Any best practices in communicating with them? I think, so obviously it passed us too. We don't catch everything, because if they don't specifically state that that's what it's for, we're not going to catch it. I think it's just helpful maybe to have a conversation with them and let them know that, you know, you attended this training or this webinar and you learned that donor advised funds, you know, are not to be used for membership funds, and just want to make sure that they knew that for the next time. We're certainly not going to pull the funds back at this point, but you know, we're always trying to do better. So that's what I would say to that one. Oh yes, possible to share the link for the recording of this so that we can share with others. Yes, I believe that is the plan, that everyone who was registered for the meeting will receive a link to the webinar once it's posted. We also thought that we would follow up with any frequently asked questions or, you know, Q&A that we couldn't quite get to, but at this point, I don't know if we'll do that or not, but we'll definitely send the link. How do we organize the information about nonprofits within our directory? Is it on keywords? I assume you're speaking about the intake form there. Who wants to take this one? Taryn, do you want to jump in?
So all of the information that we gather through the intake form, we use to update these informational sheets that we keep on nonprofits. These sheets are sorted by kind of name, area. Once again, Mahogany mentioned earlier, we take the information that we receive in these sheets and we can, in the intake form, and we communicate it out to the donor services team. And then as time comes up, we get a request, we refer back to where we have them all stored. So we have them all, sorry, filed away. And it really, again, depends on donor interest. So it depends on what comes to us to see if there's a match. We just go through and search based on what exactly it is that they're looking for in that moment. And as Mahogany said, that could be something pops up immediately to mind, or something takes several months before there's a match.
Thank you. All right. Does anybody see any questions that I didn't get to? All right. Well, it looks like we ended quite early. If there are any questions, concerns, anything else that comes up to you or comes to you over the next couple of days, please reach out to any of us, all of us. We're here to help you wherever we can. We very much view ourselves as partners to you and to our donors. So we are in this together. I'm just checking once more to make sure there's nothing else coming through. All right. It was a pleasure to be with you today. And I look forward to the next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Great ideas, great questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback. Bye.